Absolutely. I think games like Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role playing games, I think especially, can provide quite a safe framework for people to explore, like you say, trauma and other things they might not realise. And I've read sort of anecdotal studies around therapists using this as a way to kind of break down the barriers
Yeah.
between people who are especially struggling to open up, and sort of start to address some of the things that in their past are clearly manifesting in their current lives. Um,
Yeah, they give you that, as you said, they give you that safe space so people wouldn't just openly talk about certain things. But once you have in a situation in a game where it comes up, then you feel like it's kind of a character that you're playing and it's not you opening up, which gives you that freedom to express yourself more freely, which I think is brilliant.
Absolutely, and I think you see it a lot in even the characters you develop. I don't know if you're a sort of Dungeons and Dragons or similar player, but
Yeah.
there's little things I put into my own characters, and at first it wasn't conscious, but now I actually kind of lean into it a little bit. So I like playing the sort of the roguelike character, the one that likes a little bit of mischief. My
Yeah.
character, because I'm not a particularly tall person. A lot of my characters are halflings or gnomes or dwarves,
All right.
just as a little nod to the fact that I'm quite a short fellow, and it's something I've not been teased about, but it's certainly brought up from time to time, and I kind of like to lean
Yeah.
into it and go, well, my character's going to have this as well, and I can almost not necessarily work through it as an issue, but it's something nice. And one of the characters I'm playing just now is a mannequin, and they're socially a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
They don't know how to speak to new people, and that was something I struggled with some years ago. I've had to take a lot of steps to work on it personally, to be able to speak. Like a situation like this I would never have done 10 years ago. It wouldn't have happened.
Oh, that's amazing.
But using these games, I can see it in myself how much I've developed as a person, as a father, as a husband, and I do put a lot of attribution to the games that we play.
Yeah, and that's incredible, I think, and it's such an untapped market because, as we mentioned, there's a bit of, people have used it in therapy before, but that's kind of a very small environment. Not everyone goes to a therapist and does play therapy, and the idea that you could actually have like have the use the potential of games that way, but in a just a game setting with your friends. So if we and that's kind of where the idea for Happy Heaven came because I was reading about the therapeutic games, how you use existing games in therapy, and then I thought, you need a therapist and you need a person to be willing to go to therapy, which is not still unfortunately not very common. But instead, if you could just buy a game off the shelves, a mass market game that you could see next to, Monopoly or Uno, whatever, and you buy this game and you don't even realize that you play with your friends and that is actually scientifically improving your life without you even knowing. I mean, that would be amazing, just people being happier just out of playing games, and which is I can't believe how much this hasn't been used before because it's kind of like a group therapy section, and you're sitting there with friends, and maybe everyone is opening up, and everyone is working on themselves, and I feel like the social component and the interaction is so strong. I love books, obviously, as you can see from the back, but obviously it's much more individualistic, so you don't have that exchange with people, and sometimes you feel like maybe you're learning something and you're making progress, but you don't have anyone to talk about it with.
I completely agree, and I think, to expand on that, I think just the mindfulness of people going in and understanding that other people are going through very different traumas from your own. Um, so when you're going into a game, you're having that session zero where you're able to sit down and say, look, I don't want to talk about this today. I don't want this sort of content to come up. And I think people are just being much, much more mindful of the experiences of others, and it's growing empathy.
Speaking of mindfulness, it's I think it's two sides, both being mindful of other people and also mindfulness when you think about it as in being present in the moment, which has been well documented to be kind of a mental space where you can really learn things, so the educational component is strong, but also improve yourself. And so that mental state is something that you really do have in games, where you're just there and you're not thinking about anything else. You're just in the space, in the moment, in the flow, as they say in psychology. And that component of being challenged and just puts your brain in a state where you're just absorbing things. So really, games have all the components that make them perfect for this any kind of learning and improving and the psychological improvement. Yeah, I do think that it's incredible that they haven't been used more that way before, and definitely think that it's somewhere that it's going to open up a lot in the near future, just because people are these days are very mindful and sensitive around anything that has to do with mental health and just bettering ourselves and improving ourselves. And so I do think that once the game people that play games realize this, this will have a lot of following.
Absolutely.
And then I was thinking, once the scientific happiness part kind of like merged with my game part, I kept thinking, this might make people happier, but how can I be sure that I am incorporating some well-researched factors, but will they really work in a game? And then I thought, I should verify it. And so that's where the idea was born. And I said I should do a scientific study on it. And it was kind of like a spark, just this light bulb in my head. And then I said, this is perfect. It's like everything that I've ever liked and enjoyed. Basically everything I've done in my life coming together. And I felt like I guess I had a good sense of purpose into doing this study, and it felt like it's something that only I can do, because how many people have the combination of all these experiences that allow to do something like this. And so that's where it started. And I started as a game, just kind of talking about it on TikTok, and then people seem to love it. So that's where I really had the motivation to keep going. And I'm a bit of just one of those people that start lots of projects at the same time. So I wasn't necessarily going to follow up with it until I realized that people really resonated with it. And so that, and the fact that it was everything that I ever, I guess, dreamt of, made me really believe in it. So it's been a beautiful, beautiful journey.
It really is. And I think it's almost, there's a kind of meta element as well, that you've derived happiness from creating a game designed to make people happy.
Yes,
It is a wonderful story. That dream as well, that's a little bit sort of foreshadowing about the direction
right.
you were going
Yeah.
to go. It's very cool.
And
Okay then.
I have to say, I do really kind of have a relationship with my dreams where I really take them seriously. Have several of my games have come up in dreams, and I just had the idea there and kind of woke up and wrote them down, and that's how they were born. I do feel like I don't know how, and obviously doesn't have a scientific base to it, but somehow dreams or kind of there's a state between wake and dream, which is called the hypnagogic state, which is, I guess, the halfway state where you're half asleep but a little bit conscious. And apparently, historically, that lots of creative people have said that that is a space where they get their ideas. And I thought that was just a great, great way to look at things and life in general. I actually love this technique now for everything. I apply it to my whole life. I have it tattooed on my wrist. This is how much I care about this technique. And that kind of changed my whole, I guess, brain process around games. And I had a lot of fun in those months creating games that challenged all sorts of things. Some of them were unplayable, but some of them came out quite fun. And one of them was the I wanted to challenge the fact that you basically start with a goal in mind, and you already know that you're going to win by doing that your final goal is something. And I said, what if your final goal could change throughout the game? So maybe something happens during the game that makes you change your goals, so you have to adjust all your strategy that you had until now, and also you have to strategize beforehand to make sure that you don't end up in a huge mess if you suddenly have to change your goal. And so I actually talked about this with a co-designer of mine who's called April Mitchell, and we do lots of games together. And we came out with a game which is actually coming out this week, I think, from Gibson's Games. It's called Swapple. And this is basically the idea. They use what goals with other players at some point during the game, so you have to create a sequence, but your sequence might change during the game, which keeps your strategy always fresh, which I think is really fun, and Gibson's did a really great job with it. So I'm very proud of it.
That's fantastic. What was that game that's coming out this week? What draws you to that style of play?
So I would, if you had asked me this like 4 or 5 years ago, I would have definitely said competitive games. We are a very competitive family, so game night with us is not fun. I mean, it gets very angry. So I just kind of love competitive games and love that feeling of just being better than the opponent, which was just something that I grew up with. Then started to get a little bit tired of it with my family because it would always lead to arguments. And also, I guess I had a huge change myself in the last few years. Just my own journey led me to being a much more kind of like compassionate person. So having all these people arguing around me wasn't very nice for me. And so that's where I kind of like introduced my family to cooperative games. And I was like, guys, maybe instead of spending our nights arguing, we should try to work together towards something. And that worked quite well. So I get our family nights are much more peaceful now. And so I will have to say cooperative games now, which is just like, again, a few years I would have said that's not a game. Like if you can't win, then there's no way that I'm gonna play that game. But now I think it's really nice, and just the idea of finding a way to cooperate and to help each other out, and even with my son who's still a bit young, but I think that really brings out the best in people rather than necessarily having to argue. But I do love competitive games if you play with a crowd that is nice about it and they can take a win and a lose. But I think cooperative games are a really good way um, to have fun and at the same time to develop some great skills, especially for very competitive families like mine. And the mind has been a big one for us.
Which one
Um,
was that, sorry?
the mind, the mind.
The Mind.
Basically, I don't know if you've played, but basically you have to cooperate to play cards in ascending order. So you can't communicate which card you're playing, but you have to play a card and work as a group to kind of like people volunteer and say, I think I can play the next card because it's just a little bit higher than the one that's there, but not too high. And you have to make sure that you can play all the cards in the right order. And I think that's really nice. It does have that component in games that I love of I guess that feeling where you're like, okay, I feel clever doing this, and I made a choice that makes me feel good about myself, which is a component in competitive game that I don't want to give up because I think it's really fun. And but at the same time, you're not the only one that's feeling clever. Everyone is, which is a nice bonus.
And this was in about 2019. It was right before the COVID pandemic, and
Yeah.
the way the game played out was very, coming back to kind of foreshadowing. The way the map looked was very reminiscent of what we seen during the COVID pandemic. It was a little
Yeah,
bit
it was such a lucky,
eerie.
I don't know if they saw the future, but it was definitely a lucky timing for them.
Yeah, it was like in the game that we played, it was the whole of Asia that ended up being sort of blocked off from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It was very like, oh, okay, and that was, we'll maybe not play this for a little while. I think need to
Yeah.
let that let that go by. Fantastic. Describe your aha moment for your most successful game. Was it a sudden flash of inspiration or a slow burn of refinement?
All right. So most of my ideas for games are definitely sudden flashes. I think that's a little bit of the nature of mass market as opposed to hobby, where you might have to have a bit of a slower um, process. But also because, as I mentioned, lots of my games come from kind of like sudden sparks, sometimes in dreams, sometimes when I'm awake, but they definitely do feel sometimes like they don't come from myself, just like this random flash of idea. Um, I have already mentioned the kind of the aha moment in Happy Haven where I decided to put together my two passions. So I actually mentioned a different one as well. And that one came from um, I guess the original Sid wasn't as much of a flash, but I was reading The Art of Game Design by Jesse Fell, which is one of
Very
the
good book. Very,
best
very good
books
book.
of game about very very good book about game design. And I was just starting. It was I think I had only designed a couple of games by then. It was definitely in the first few months of my journey, and I read the book said they had a chapter about creative thinking and how to, I guess, get more ideas about games, and he said something that a technique that I guess we could call it, which is to challenge the assumption. And he actually gave an example of a legacy game. I don't think it was Pandemic. I think it was Brisk Legacy,
Brisk
and
never as well.
yeah,
Very,
it's a
very
great
good game.
game, and he gave this game as an example of challenging the assumption, where he said, one of the assumptions of board games could be that the game doesn't change when you play at different times, and by challenging this assumption, they created this legacy games, and I thought that was just a great way to look at things and life in general. I actually love this technique now for everything. I apply it to my whole life. I have it tattooed on my wrist. This is how much I care about this technique. And that kind of changed my whole, I guess, brain process around games. And I had a lot of fun in those months creating games that challenged all sorts of things. Some of them were unplayable, but some of them came out quite fun. And one of them was the I wanted to challenge the fact that you basically start with a goal in mind and you already know that you're going to win by doing that your final goal is something. And I thought that was just a great way to look at things and life in general. I actually love this technique now for everything. I apply it to my whole life. I have it tattooed on my wrist. This is how much I care about this technique. And that kind of changed my whole, I guess, brain process around games. And I had a lot of fun in those months creating games that challenged all sorts of things. Some of them were unplayable, but some of them came out quite fun. And one of them was the I wanted to challenge the fact that you basically start with a goal in mind and you already know that you're going to win by doing that your final goal is something. And I said, what if your final goal could change throughout the game? So maybe something happens during the game that makes you change your goals. So you have to adjust all your strategy that you had until now, and also you have to strategize beforehand to make sure that you don't end up in a huge mess if you suddenly have to change your goal. And so I actually talked about this with a co-designer of mine who's called April Mitchell, and we do lots of games together. And we came out with a game which is actually coming out this week, I think, from Gibson's Games. It's called Swapple. And this is basically the idea that you swap goals with other players at some point during the game. So you have to create a sequence, but your sequence might change during the game, which keeps your strategy always fresh, which I think is really fun. And Gibson's did a really great job with it. So I'm very proud of it.
That's fantastic. What was that game that's coming out this week?
It's called Swapple, and it's from
Swapple.
Gibson's Games, and they had a collaboration with the ARHS. So they have all these like floral designs, which is super beautiful. It's already appeared on a couple of magazines. Well, on the Mojo Nation 2025 magazine, they mentioned it there, and it's also a finalist in Gift of the Year award in the UK. So it's doing really well, and it's only now coming out. So we're expecting great things from it.
Fantastic. Well, all the very best with it. We'll make sure that it's
Thank
tagged
you.
in whatever videos we're putting out. That's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
And now the next one is one that I've spoken with a few people about this question, and it always brings up a little bit of debate. I think we generally agree on the answer, but there's often a debate around innovation versus iteration in game design.
But I think for me, it's always important to have that big innovative component in it. And I have to say, this has not always played in my favor because sometimes my games are too out there. And this has been a feedback that I've gotten consistently from companies where they're like, wow, this is so different. And then they say, but it's too different for us to risk publishing because mass market companies especially are very well, they say they want very innovative games, but they don't actually mean completely
They want a bit
innovative.
of
They mean
tried
something
and
that we are
tested.
familiar
Yeah,
with.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, something that gives us that, like a bit of familiarity, but also one nice component that's new, but it doesn't necessarily change everything on the table, because otherwise we don't know if people are going to enjoy it, and we're not going to risk spending a whole lot of money for something that we're not sure is going to work. And so that's kind of been something that it's been bittersweet for me ever since I started, because I had these ideas and I was like, this is so super new, we need to try this. And they're like, yeah, I love it, it's super exciting, but it's too risky for me, I can't do it. So I was like, oh no. So I guess I dialed it back a little bit, and tried to cover those innovative components with a bit of familiar dynamics in the games that I do now. But I have to say, the best games that I've designed are very innovative, and no one has signed them. So it's important to me, but it doesn't work as well as it should.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like you take the concept car market or New York Fashion Week, the outfits the designers are putting out there. It's not really meant, that's not to show what we're going to be wearing in the future or what we're going to be driving in the future. It's to show this is what's possible once we kind of scale it back and refine it and make it into something that is going to be usable every day. It sort of feels the same with some of your innovative
That's actually, yeah, a
concepts, because
great
they're absolutely
comparison.
massive. But actually going, it's one little aspect of that we'll take and we'll put it into a game. That innovative spark we'll put in there. It's not meant to be the whole thing. It's just to show this is what we can do. Doesn't mean it's what we
Yeah,
will do, but it's to
absolutely.
give an idea.
Absolutely. And I have to say, there are some companies that actually do enjoy a bit of a more kind of out of the box thinking, and I think that works really well for them. But if you work in mass market and you want to play with, or you want to kind of get a deal with the bigger companies, that's exactly what you have to do. Like, maybe you have the big idea. That's a great comparison that you made. You have the big idea, and then you say, can I use that shirt in a way that's actually wearable? Yes, I think I totally agree with that.
Yeah, because I mean, we're already in quite a relatively small niche when you compare, this industry to many others. And if you're suddenly taking your niche and making it smaller and smaller, because the market for people buying these, really crunchy, big, rules heavy games,
Yeah,
or they've got components which take a little bit of getting your head around. You're making this niche smaller and smaller because there's only going to be a handful of people potentially that's going to buy them. They'll probably love it and they'll spend all their money on it, but it's finding those 5 or 6 people that will absolutely love the game.
exactly.
I
And I
can
think,
see it from their point, but
yeah, and I think if it's something that you really, I think it's one of those things where, I mean, most of our job is trying to sign deals with other companies. So most of game designers don't just have published their games, and so if you choose that path, which most of us do, I guess you have to compromise a little bit. And so, but I do have to say that I think personally that if there's something that you really, I mean, with, like with games, the ones that have really changed the game, have been things that people wouldn't have signed because they were a little bit too out there, and so people self-published them, and then they did really well. Which is not to say that it will happen to everyone that self-publishes, but I do think that if there's one idea that is too innovative for the current market, but you absolutely think that is amazing, and you actually have proof of people loving it, then I think it's worth trying to do it on your own, because that's what I mean. It's that balance, like you, the bigger companies have to follow what they know will work. They're not going to risk their money for something that is unsafe. And so that doesn't mean that when they pass on your idea, sometimes it doesn't mean that the idea wasn't brilliant,
yeah,
and it doesn't mean that that idea would have suddenly changed everyone's perception and would have changed the way everyone plays games. And this makes me think of might not look as innovative now as initially, but it makes me think of code names. And basically, the mass market until then was only kind of like those very light American party games that are, well, now they now all look the same because there's lots of them. And Codenames was very different because it had just a very kind of like a brainy, thinky component. Even though it's very light, it still has a bit of that. You have to think of how to get the word right, and that's a game that probably the bigger American companies didn't sign it, and they wouldn't have signed it back then because they just want to do games that people understand immediately, and that they're really worried about um, people feeling not smart, and so they don't want to. Lots of times I've heard people, they don't want to publish games that makes people feel on the spot and that they're not good enough as other people. It's just not party enough. People, you don't want to be at a party and suddenly feel like you're the least intelligent person in the room. And so the game was definitely not a game that was thought to do well in the American party game scene. But it did. It became extremely popular and people loved it. And they actually shifted a little bit what people are looking for. So I remember a couple of years ago, all the companies were looking for the next code names because they realized, oh, maybe now people are they do want to think a little bit more when they're having a party. They're not just miming and having cards on the face and parading anymore. They want to do something that's a little bit deeper. And so if you had been pitching code names, which they did, they wouldn't have signed it, and then they signed it in Europe, and then it became huge. So sometimes you don't know, and sometimes if you have something that is it feels innovative and it's too innovative for people to sign, but you really absolutely are sure that that is going to be big, then I think it's worth a shot, which is kind of what I'm doing with Happy Haven. I haven't even thought about pitching it because I just know that people wouldn't you don't see Hasbro publishing a game that's scientifically proven to make people happier, but maybe it's one of those things that if I do it and if I if people love it, then it's really going to work. But when you really think outside the box, I think you have to kind of put your own passion into it and not rely on other people to push your vision, which is something that only you can do if it's really something different.
I don't know. I think Hasbro like something. Well, they like something that'll make them money, first of all. But Happy Haven's got a really clear hook, a really clear message, and I think that could work for them. I'm struggling to remember the name. I'll look them up afterwards. But they worked in mass market as a publisher, so he was on the opposite end of what you're talking about, and that was one of his 10 rules of pitching to publishers: don't chase trends, because just because it's popular now, remember that's taken them 2 years to get to that point. If you start trying to chase that trend that they started 2 years ago, there's going to be something else 2 years from now. You need to just think about what's fun, what's good, what you enjoy, and what's testing well, what's attractive, aesthetically pleasing. Don't chase what's happening now. Don't go and make the next Wingspan or Finspan or whichever span they're on to now, because you're going to be 2 years behind them. And
exactly. And I mean, that's I guess the frustrating thing for designers, that it's a really, really fine balance, because that's what they say, like we want something new that is going to be the next wave of games. You think, and then suddenly you get this idea and you're like, well, maybe this could work so great, and you have this game and maybe everyone says no, or maybe it does well and you never know. But I think that thrill of, are they going to see it the way I see it, and are they going to have that vision? I think it's a really, really fun part of the job. I think for most of my games, the ones that I pitch, that moment is where surprisingly, some of the games that do very well in playtesting, they're not necessarily what the companies love, which is also what makes me realize that there's a bit of a gap there between what people think is going to work and what actually is going to work. But I think I guess the moment of truth comes when you pitch it, and you kind of pitch it to 4 or 5. I always pitch it to the biggest publishers first, which I'm lucky enough to have great relationships with now. And their feedback tells me everything. So sometimes they just don't get what I'm seeing, and so I just abandon the game. I kind of catch their vibes on the first few pitches, and if I see them kind of like looking at me like, this is something I've never considered before, then I know to keep going. And if I just realize that it's not really being taken as well as I hoped, then I leave it, which is something that happened to me recently with a game that I loved. So I was quite confident when I started pitching it, and then I realized that people just weren't loving it as much as we were. So that's where most of my games die, when I realized that people are not getting excited about them. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I think this was the biggest lesson that I had with games, and it kind of looking back at it, all fit perfectly, because I started pitching games, as I mentioned, in a time where I'm having a kind of like a personal journey of even spiritual journey after my son was born. And I think the fact that I started doing this at that time was perfect and really had to teach me a lesson, because actually growing up, I was very much a perfectionist. My mom is very tough, and so if I wasn't perfect and the best at everything, it just felt like she wouldn't love me. So that was obviously for a child is something that really leave the mark. And so throughout my life, I always had to be perfect at everything. And if I had a kind of like an inkling that I wouldn't be perfect at something, I just wouldn't do it. I guess that kind of that level of perfectionism is really kind of tied together with just a huge fear of failure. So just failing for me was devastating. It was not an option, and so I was either the best or I just wouldn't do it. And and so when I started, and initially, I think all of us, when we start designing games, we just think we have a great game, we're going to pitch it, and we're going to get a deal, and we're going to get rich. I think this is how everyone starts, and you don't really know how it really works, and you don't realize how much rejection you're going to have. And so when I started, I was luckily the first few pitches were very encouraging. So I think the very first, actually maybe the second or third pitch I ever did was to Hasbro, and which is very uncommon because you don't really get to pitch to Hasbro so early.
Straight to the
And
biggest in the game.
yes, exactly. And they didn't sign my game, but they were so encouraging, which I mean, I immediately realized from the feedback that I got from the start. But then in the following month, there was lots of rejection, which was not something that I was able to deal with back then, because, as I said, because of the way I was raised. And so for me, rejection was just so personal and so hurtful. So I remember all the first rejections were just crying and I'm useless and all of that, which is something that my brain used to do. And all the work that I did on myself in those years um, was parallel to having to learn how to deal with this, and this was huge for me. I think it changed my whole life to just be able to see that sometimes, not just in games, but in your whole life, sometimes you're just not what people need right now.
But I think probably safe in saying actually we learn more from our failures and our mistakes than we do our victories quite often. There was a manager I had some years ago, and he's going, "You're going to fail, but what to do is fail fast. If you're going to do something, find out quite quickly where it's maybe going to fall down, and that's something that you can work on quite quickly. It's not some drawn out process. If you're going to give it a go, give it a damn go, but accept that it might fall down and learn from that point there. And then the next time you're able to get that a little bit further."
To answer your question, it's definitely not something that I want my son to ever think. So while I'm definitely very much the opposite with him, and I am very mindful of not making choices that are directly influenced by my trauma, because you can make the wrong choice in both extremes. So it's definitely important to me that he can do whatever makes him happy, and that he knows that my love is not conditional on what he does. And that is definitely my number one priority with him. But I think it is a gift to be able to have this knowledge, and my son is a very happy child. I mean, if I had to pay the price to be to have a tougher life and then know that my son is going to reap the benefits of it, then I think it's worth it. So I lost those opportunities where people could have played it and they would have been like, oh, this is great, and they might have published it, but they didn't, because I didn't play test it properly. So that's definitely a big one.
That's really interesting. Sort of, I think certainly as you say within the hobby space, playtesting, is kind of king. It's the thing, and it's not just playing the game over and over. It's for me when I'm sort of playtesting my games, I think it has to go through a sort of series of stages. It's almost a kind of software development cycle that I
Yeah.
go through. Whereas going to a unit test, I do it myself. I'll unit test individual mechanics. Goes, does that mechanic work in isolation? And then you're going to sort of integrate, integration testing of bringing all the units together and go and do these flow one into the other, and then you have to get the peer review and you bring in other people. So to hear that sort of the mass market's slightly different, I think there's still going to be an emphasis on playtest, but it's not given the same kind of gold standard perhaps as hobbyists will take it. It's really quite interesting to hear.
Definitely, and also because of what the market requires. So you have like maybe well, you pitch all the time. If you go to events, there's like maybe 5 or 6 events that you're gonna go through a year. I personally do most of my pitching online, but you get meetings with companies like over and over. And so basically, if I'm pitching to a company now, say I'm pitching about 10 games now, and then I'm going to go to Mojo Pitch event in June and July, which is a big pitch event for mass market companies. And by then, I need a whole new set of games because everyone has already seen the ones that I've seen now. So we are in March, and they have about 3 months to create maybe 10 new games from scratch. So that obviously means that I'm not going to play test a game for years, but I have to, in this month, make sure that these games work perfectly, which is definitely something that I hadn't considered before.
So some designers are very protective of their intellectual property. Where do you draw the line between inspiration and imitation, and how do you protect your work? And then into that, have you ever felt ripped off by another designer, and how did you handle that situation?
So I think when we start, at least it was for me and for many people that I told to, when we start, we are very worried about people stealing our game, both other designers and companies. So at least well, I think this would be the same in both markets, but in mass market, companies rely a lot on what we call inventors, but designers. So most of the bigger companies have maybe half of all their games coming from external designers and inventors. And so with companies, it's not really a worry because they now, especially maybe if it's the first game and they don't know who you are, but then again, your games are probably terrible then, so you don't have to worry. But if you start knowing them, they know that we all know each other. So we know other designers, and if word goes around that a company stole a design, then they're gonna lose lots of good designers. So it's not worth it for them. So a combination of that, the companies have lots of respect towards inventors, and also the fact that basically all games are again iterations of each other. That means that basically there's not much you can do about it. So you just have to kind of like give up on the idea that you're ever going to protect anything. It's more like speed to market, and once you're in the market, people are hopefully going to know your game. So if then another identical game comes out, then it's a bad name for the designer or the company. So I guess you have that little bit of protection. What I found more than people deliberately wanting to copy a concept, which has never happened to me. I had a game that I pitched to a company, and then shortly after they came, well, not shortly after, maybe a year and a half after, they published a game that was very similar. And I was in a really good place with them to be able to talk about it, and they actually showed me that they had been working on that separately. So basically, if you don't have a good relationship, I'd say don't even ask, because it's not worth it. But because we had a great relationship, then I thought, I just obviously didn't accuse them or anything, but I said, do you remember this game? I kind of mentioned this to you a while ago, and they said, we didn't realize when you pitched it to us that it was too close, and so that all got solved that way.
So some designers are very protective of their intellectual property. Where do you draw the line between inspiration and imitation, and how do you protect your work? And then into that, have you ever felt ripped off by another designer, and how did you handle that situation?
So I think when we start, at least it was for me and for many people that I told to, when we start, we are very worried about people stealing our game, both other designers and companies. So at least well, I think this would be the same in both markets, but in mass market, companies rely a lot on what we call inventors, but designers. So most of the bigger companies have maybe half of all their games coming from external designers and inventors. And so with companies, it's not really a worry because they now, especially maybe if it's the first game and they don't know who you are, but then again, your games are probably terrible then, so you don't have to worry. But if you start knowing them, they know that we all know each other. So we know other designers, and if word goes around that a company stole a design, then they're gonna lose lots of good designers. So it's not worth it for them. So a combination of that, the companies have lots of respect towards inventors, and also the fact that basically all games are again iterations of each other. That means that basically there's not much you can do about it. So you just have to kind of like give up on the idea that you're ever going to protect anything. Um, it's more like, speed to market, and once you're in the market, people are hopefully going to know your game. So if then another identical game comes out, then it's a bad name for the designer or the company. So I guess you have that little bit of protection. What I found more than people deliberately wanting to copy a concept, which has never happened to me. I had a game that I pitched to a company, and then shortly after they came, well, not shortly after, maybe a year and a half after, they published a game that was very similar. And I was in a really good place with them to be able to talk about it, and they actually showed me that they had been working on that separately. So basically, if you don't have a good relationship, I'd say don't even ask, because it's not worth it. But because we had a great relationship, then I thought, I just obviously didn't accuse them or anything, but I said, do you remember this game? I kind of mentioned this to you a while ago, and they said, we didn't realize when you pitched it to us that it was too close, and so that all got solved that way. But I'd say that it's so hard to get your game published that it's going to be even harder for them. So it's not really that big of an issue. But what I was saying is that more than people deliberately doing it, which I don't think it really happens. And if it does, it's okay. Especially in mass market, you have, like, as I said, like hundreds of games at a time. If someone steals one, it's fine. I'll have the next one. But I think more than that, what happens is that sometimes you don't actually realize that some of your ideas come from somewhere else. I think because you have if you're passionate about games, you're gonna play hundreds of games. You're gonna read books about it. You're gonna read online. You're gonna maybe read a sentence in passing of some game that came out 3 years ago, and then you forget about it. But maybe it's like stored somewhere in your brain, and then you come up with an idea, and it might have been influenced by that, and you don't even realize. And I think that's an issue, especially when you work with other designers, which I do a lot. I have lots of my games are co-designed with other designers. And sometimes I've talked about this a lot with April Mitchell, which I mentioned her before, and we work together a lot. And sometimes we realize that maybe we're talking about a game with someone else, like a different designer, and then our mind takes us back to maybe something that we had discussed together. And so you're like, okay, no, I can't really say this. And so maybe I mentioned I mentioned to the other designer we could do that, and then I realized, oh no, I think this is too influenced from something I discussed with April, and then I say, okay, no, I can't do this. But then maybe they heard it, and then maybe it comes up with someone else. If we don't realize that, there's not much we can do, as long as it's all in good faith and you work with people that respect you and you respect, and so you're sure that they're not out to get you. Then if you think they're getting too close to something that you worked on together, then you just tell them,
You have a
and
discussion.
hopefully they might do something about that. Maybe include you in the contracts, I guess, or at least acknowledge that that something wrong happened.
Because I think this was another one of the questions that was quite, I wouldn't say well debated, but it was discussed at length with some of the other interviews I've done, and we both sort of said exactly the same there. You maybe when you're first starting out, you're absolutely you're very protective of these ideas, and I know for me it sort of flipped when I can't remember who the creator was. What they spoke about was the best way to not have an idea stolen is to tell people about it, because I think anybody in this industry knows how much work it is to get a game from an idea to being published.
Yep.
It's a massive amount of work, and if you're putting out into the world saying this is my idea, this is what I'm looking to do, these are maybe some of the components, people will realise how far through that journey you are already, and they'll go, oh, damn, I wish I'd thought of that, and they're going to go back and
Yeah.
they're going, oh, well, I had a similar idea, but actually you're much further on. It's not something that I can touch. If people don't know about it, they can accidentally steal it, or you're accidentally stealing
Yeah.
their idea at that point because they got it out there first. So actually, the best way to be protective is not be protective. It's actually tell everybody, and that grants you
Yeah.
that level of
I agree.
protection. To say if it was to go to court, let's God forbid it ever gets to a stage like that for any of us, but if it was to get to court, they're going to look at timestamps, they're going to look at dates and say, well, we can see from TikTok that this was posted at this time, and your documents say it was posted then, you posted 2 years later. there's a fair argument that you've taken their idea, knowingly or otherwise, is sort of by the by. But you can see they got there first, so tell people about your
Yeah,
idea.
it is. I mean, it can be. I mean, the issue there is that I totally agree with this. The issue is that if you are like a just a person posting on TikTok, and then say a big company
Mm.
sees it and does it internally. um, I mean, I think okay. So I think it's important not to be scared, but also to be mindful of what could happen, so that you're kind of prepared and you know how
Mm.
much you're willing to risk. So if a huge company says someone posting on TikTok a game, and then they do a similar game, there is basically nothing that you can do about it. They're gonna make more money than you. They're gonna make a game that's probably better than yours, because then they will develop it better internally.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like the direct marketing, maybe it's called.
Mm.
Anyway, like people that sell things on TV. And usually when you sign a deal with them, you make lots of money, because they obviously lots of people see it. This is in the US, and I think they were offered the deal, but they didn't quite like the deal. But at the same time, they pitched the concept to Zuru, and Zuru signed it. So they licensed the idea to Zuru, and Zuru produced a bunch of balloons. And then the initial company that they pitched it to, they just made it anyway, even though he like refused to do it with them. I think they only changed like the number of balloons from, I don't know, like 100 to 90 or whatever. And he actually sued them, which is very uncommon, because no one would go to court against a huge multi-billion dollar company. But he still did it, and Zuru backed him, which was amazing of them, I think. They basically helped him out throughout the whole process, instead of saying, we don't care. And I believe he won. So it does happen, but this is like something that usually doesn't happen. Well, at least I thought, and many people thought before starting, which is, you make a game and it gets signed and you're rich, which I think that's probably the most disappointing thing, both for us and for people that see it. So they say, oh, you're a game designer, and I have games out that have been published by publishers, and they're like, oh, so you're getting rich, and not really. I love that when you do get a game out there, it's just huge, and you see it and you see the box, and you're so proud of yourself. It's actually a process that's full of love, and it's full of smart people working on it, from the designer to the company to everyone in between. Just a whole lot of people working together to get a game out there. So I think it's really a lot more work, but also art all the way through, not just when from the person that creates it, but everyone that collaborates, and this beautiful process of bringing a game to life, which is beautiful.
Yeah, but I think that's where the joy and, as you say, beauty comes from, is from the process. If it was a get rich quick scheme, it wouldn't be nearly as satisfying down to your core. Because I remember when I sold the first copy of my game, I was at a Christmas market stall, and I had the game there, and she went, oh, what if it was a get rich quick scheme? It wouldn't be nearly as satisfying down to your core. Because I remember when I sold the first copy of my game, I was at a Christmas market stall, and I had the game there, and she went, oh, what's this about? And it's like, oh, this is my game Disaster Tour. It's a storytelling collaborative game where you try and survive an ongoing disaster, but the game's trying to kill you. So and she went, oh, tell me more. And the eyes widened, and we started speaking about it more. So, you've got different characters with different objectives and motivations. They might have caused a disaster, and how does that impact how they try and spin the narrative, and these sort of things. And you just seen the eyes going, and she went, I'd love to buy a copy. And it was the satisfaction, there was no other word for it, just how great that felt, was I sold this. I took this
Yeah,
silly little idea, which, because I'm much the same as you, that it takes this one spark of something I've heard or I've seen. And I think it was a podcast, somebody mentioned that they needed a disaster tour guide in their D&D game. And I went, a disaster tour guide? That sounds like someone who could run a game. And
yeah,
I imagine them with a hat, the string underneath, and they're taking you, on the sort of hike. And I went, I need to develop a game around this, around, you're needing a guide for a disaster, and
amazing.
that's where my game came from, and taking it from that, 3 words to a finished article, and then selling it to someone, put it in their hands and then telling them the story about it, and they went, this sounds fantastic, and they took the copy, and then it's happened time since then. There's some uh, beautifully satisfying, right in the very core of you, that just makes you
Yeah,
feel
it
great.
is
I've
huge.
improved someone's day. That's a good thing.
I totally agree. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful process and a beautiful feeling when people actually appreciate what you do.